Live, paltalk.com, and on YouTube. You know, there's a lot going on the streets of our major cities. We are seeing police under attack, police cars burned and trashed, New York City, Philadelphia, cops getting beaten up in Chicago, Portland, Seattle. It's a real mess. And here in New York City, there's a feel to the town. There's a vibe going on that I think, even though I was in Detroit dealing with what was going on in Detroit at the same time, what we saw in Detroit was pretty parallel, I think, to what folks saw in New York City during the 70s and in the 80s. And I don't think it's really regressed quite that far, but the feel is there. There's a fear. You can almost smell it when you're walking down the street. It's not walking through New York City, the safest major city in the United States, without fear of being assaulted. People are getting assaulted, and I think it's just getting worse and worse every day. And so I thought it would be great to invite back my good friend, Curtis Sliwa, the founder of the Guardian Angels. Curtis, welcome to this discussion on Pal Talk and on Facebook Live and on YouTube. And am I right about this? Is the atmosphere such that it feels like the 70s and the early 80s?
As my beard grows longer since we've last had our discussion with all of the Facebook followers here, Gary, we're slowly moving in that direction. We're starting to slide into the abyss, and there are many hallmarks that are being achieved now that sort of harken you back to the 70s, 80s, and early 90s. I would say the one parallel is that the cops have been rendered impotent. They've deprived them of Viagra, so they're not able to function. They've been told to stand down, and the criminals know that. They sense that, and they seize every opportunity they can. Look, the same number of guns were out in the street. It's just that the criminals kept them out of sight, out of mind. Now they're so bold, they're so brazen, they'll walk down the street with an open handgun, fully loaded, threatening their adversaries, and they're getting into these massive shootouts, one side of the street versus the other side of the street. And in typical fashion, they never hit their intended targets, the other gangbangers. They hit innocent people who happen to be in that vicinity, and the cops don't have a handle on it, and the mayor basically is telling the cops to back off. So yeah, this is a recipe for us sliding back into what I call the belly of the beast of the 70s, 80s, and 90s of New York City,
where you had 1,400, 1,500, 1,600, 1,700. In 1980, I think it was over 2,000 people were killed. Now, last year, it was fewer than one person murdered a day in New York City. Over the weekend on Sunday, I believe there were 7 homicides. Every borough scored a homicide except for Manhattan. So, I'm not saying that it's going to be 7 homicides a day, and I don't know how good my math is, but if we have 7 homicides a day from now to the end of the year, we are back to where we were in the 70s and 80s and 90s.
Well, the other difference is that back in the 70s and 80s, you would wheel somebody in with a gunshot wound. There was a pretty good chance that they would expire. Now, medical modern science is so sophisticated, they can almost grab you right out of the grave and bring you back to life. Or there'd be a lot more on the murder rolls. But you're noticing a lot of these guys that are being shot are getting shot right in the head. That means the gangbangers are coming right up to them and putting the gun either to the side of their head or the back of their head and blasting their brains out, almost guaranteeing that they'll scrape your brains off the ground, but you'll be dead on arrival. So that's a hallmark notation that they're getting close to their adversaries, that they're walking around like they got it like that. They know there's cameras everywhere, which there were none in the 80s and 90s. No cameras in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. And they're still being able to execute people and know that they're probably not going to get caught or captured or have to do any time. Even if they do get caught, there will be no bail. They'll be remanded, not to jail, but back out into the streets to do it again.
I think a big difference between, and what prompted me to invite you back on, was the Netflix series about how the mob was running New York City, featuring your efforts to fight the crime when you formed the Magnificent 13, which then morphed into the Guardian Angels. And back then, arguably, it was the mob's hold on the city that caused for this burst of crime that was going on. Today, they're fairly impotent, at least relatively speaking, compared to then. Today, it's not the mob that's causing this, I don't believe. I think it's a lack of political action.
The lack of political action has empowered the new gangs. It's not the old Italian organized crime, the Bonanos, the Lucchese's, the Colombos, the Genovese, the Gambinos. No, they're still active. Because gambling is not legal in New York, that's how they make most of their money. Illegal gambling, extortion, racketeering. But they don't have the hold on New York like they used to. They used to be able to squeeze your neck and pull your chain simultaneously and give you a Colombian necktie. And nobody would do anything about it. Now they operate in the shadows. But it's really street gangs who have emerged. So you have black street gangs like the Bloods and the Crips. You have MS-13, the emerging strong gang from Central America and Mexico, and a lot of subsets out there. And they control the drug dealing. They control the flow and the traffic of guns. And obviously, they all want to prove that they're the baddest guy, baddest hombre in town. So they want to be able to use the guns with impunity. That's why they have New York City paralyzed in fear. This isn't just random shootings. These are highly organized retaliatory strikes, drive-by shootings. Gary, do you know who created the drive-by shooting? A New Yorker who had left Brooklyn because he couldn't make his bones in organized crime here. He went to visit with his uncle in Chicago, south side of Chicago. Al Capone, in trying to take over the north side, and Cicero and parts of the south side from the Irish mob, the Polish mob, and the remnants of the Italian mob, created the drive-by shooting. Back in the early 1920s, that was his hallmark. And we've never had drive-by shootings here in New York City. Now, all of a sudden, we're having a series of drive-by shootings as if this was Los Angeles, in which obviously you anticipate, because nobody walks around there, that people are going to be shooting at one another out of their vehicles.
And of course, when you shoot out of a vehicle, the chances of you hitting an innocent bystander, a 3-year-old child in a stroller at a park with his mom and dad, as happened, I believe that was in Brooklyn, the chances increase.
And those individuals have not been arrested yet. This was the crime that you would have thought would have caused the best forensic department of the NYPD to come front and center and resolve this crime. Everybody wanted these 3 individuals. You see them on film. They're shooting randomly in the direction of the child and their intended target. And actually, they didn't hit their target. They hit the 1-year-old baby. The wake and the funeral and burial were today. And guess what? Still no arrests. That's telling you a lot there. Criminals are watching this and saying, wow, even if you make page 1, even if you kill a 1-year-old child, even if everyone comes together and says, yeah, we got to go out and get those thugs, nothing. So that's when you as a thug say, hey, we got it like that. We rule. Whose streets? Our streets, the gang streets. And the cops just basically chase all day. They chase. Instead of preemptively getting ahead of it, because we had a great anti-crime unit. These were men and women undercover. They weren't just undercover. They had cars that were rental cars. They knew the neighborhood. They knew the gangbangers. They knew where the retaliation would take place. So they preemptively cut everything off in the past. Well, Dermot Shea, the lapdog police commissioner of Comrade Bill de Blasio, pulled the best crime-fighting vehicle the NYPD had off the streets. And ever since, it's been slaughter. And today, he had the nerve in the aftermath of the burial of the 1-year-old child to say, well, I think there's going to be a lot of shootings all through the summer. Well, hell, you're the one who pulled the one group of cops who were able to get the gangbangers and the guns off the street. And now you want to send out social workers and people doing crisis intervention as opposed to actually dealing with these gangbangers. who have all the furniture upstairs rearranged in the wrong rooms. There's no doubt about that. But no social worker in the world is going to be able to get between them and bullets intended for their targeted enemy. They got to be arrested. They got to be incarcerated. They got to be taken off the streets. The cops do that, not social workers.
Except now the cops don't want to do it. A lot of them. I don't want to malign the entire department, but I know for a fact, and you know for a fact, that we have officers who are reticent to actually take action. They get a call, they take their time getting there, hoping that it's over before they get there. I'm not saying all cops. I want to emphasize that again. But there are a number of them that just don't want to get involved. The president of the lieutenants union sent out a message to his members, which I've seen a copy of, which says, look, be cautious, don't get too involved, because a lot of times we're getting set up. Somebody creates a confrontation with the cops retaliate. He has a friend out there with a camera. It goes viral, and you could lose your job. Or in today's climate and with today's new rules, you could actually be arrested for doing your job as a police officer.
Well, more importantly, people don't understand gangbangers work at a whole different level than protesters. So you've seen some of these protesters get abused by cops. Absolutely. The cops need to be disciplined. In some instances, lose their shield, lose their pension, the whole 9 yards. Gangbangers, sometimes the only language they understand is paying compliance. So if you're dealing with a whole bunch of them and you're rousting them, do you think that all of a sudden they're going to fold like a cheap camera? They resist. They hit back. They threaten the cops. And so you have to be able to bum rush these gangbangers, take them down. You got to be able to cuff them, lickety-split. You can't be having dialogue with them on the corner, because all of a sudden 40 gangbangers will come around, and then the cops will be outnumbered. And the worst thing for cops to have to do is retreat and surrender. Because when word gets out in the streets, these cops ain't tough, they're soft, they're weak. And then they won't get out of the cars. And then they won't come down that block. And that means the gang rules. So that's why they have that slogan now, whose streets? Our streets. Because the gangbangers know the cops are not going to come into their streets and flex. What we mean by flex is throw their weight around, because they can't. And number two, if they do what the department wants them to do and try to, calm the situation down with rational, common sense conversation, the thugs, the gangbangers, take that as a sign of weakness. They don't look at that as like, well, this cop, he's not being abusive, he's not using the F-bomb. They look like, look at this softy. What did they send this guy or this gal in here? We can roll on them. The rules of the street are completely different. And most people, they're so esoteric, they're so pretentious, they just have no idea. These elected officials, do you think they've ever been in the streets and had a fight? You really think they've ever been jumped? No. And by the way, once they get into elected office, who do they want securing their safety? Armed, trained police officers, whether on duty or off duty, from the local police departments. What fake, phony, fraudulent hypocrites they are. In fact, if they want to defund the police, the first thing you do to defund the police is you strip them of all the armed security guards that are at their beck and call 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days of the year. And then these rappers who talk all big and bad, when they go in to do a show, they always use private security, and they'll tell the private security outfit, hey, I want off-duty cops. Because if things get out of hand, the cop is going to know how to handle it, not a rent-a-cop. I want off-duty cops as part of my entourage. So, here the guy, F the police, kill the police. Yeah, but for my security, we're paying big dollars. I want off-duty cops. Why do you want off-duty cops, 50 Cent? Why do you want off-duty cops? Well, they want off-duty cops because they know off-duty cops are going to be able to negotiate problems in the street, be able to flash the bag, will know exactly when to get intense, when to back off. So why is it the very people who malign the police, the politicians and the rappers, always want off-duty police officers or on-duty police officers as part of their security details?
So, I believe, and you remember, I think, Ike McKinnon when he was chief of police in Detroit, and he used to have a saying, the gangs walk around and they wear colors, but the biggest, baddest gang in Detroit, the color they wear is blue. Doesn't matter the color of their skin. They wear blue. And we're not going to let these gangbangers take over the city of Detroit. We don't have this attitude in New York City. And to me, there were two incidents that are really relatively minor that set the tone for what's happening on the streets of New York City today, Curtis Sliwa. And both were identical, except in one case it was a water bottle, and the other case it was milk. And you remember the video of them pouring water on top of cops, pouring milk on top of cops, and they stand there and they do nothing. First of all, are they cowards? Really? Because I think under the whatever code the cops are supposed to follow, that's considered cowardice. But more importantly, it sends a message: the cops ain't gonna do nothing. We can pour milk over the cop's head and they ain't gonna do nothing. And I think that set the tone in New York City.
Oh, no doubt. And the new training that is administered in the police academy accentuates on you being a social worker, doing crisis intervention, and not being a cop. So they don't prepare you for the reality of that kind of an embarrassment. And I remember both instances last summer because it was a message to all it was to follow. You had these two cops in Brownsville, Brooklyn, tough precinct, 73rd precinct. They're walking back to the precinct and they're getting doused with water over and over, and they got their heads down and they're like never she schlubby. Brand new cops right out of the academy, told not to resist. If the cops had been taught to resist, you better believe they would have resisted and they would have had backup. And then in the other case, the milk. Same situation was up in the Bronx. And in fact, it involved female police officers. All of a sudden, they were throwing milk at them. And the female police officers ran away instead of confronting the people who were playing with them. It's like a cat with catnip. You know, play with them, play with them. And then when you see that immediately they show fear, they retreat. Well, then you go on the attack. And then what becomes a Clockwork Orange style scenario emerges. A lot of these young people are sadists. So they want to just inflict pain. They want to sort of beat you down. And if they can do it to the cops and get away with it, that's a signal to everybody else in the neighborhood. I got it like that. Look, I beat up 5-0. I beat a cop. F the police. I got away with it. Look, they took me to the station house. I got a disappearance ticket. They rip it up and say, hey, I didn't get bonded. I'm out in the streets. I didn't have to pay any bail. And what do you think? The other criminals look at that and say, yeah, we got it like that. We rule. It sort of takes me back to that famous part of the early part of the film, the cult classic, The Warriors, where you have Cyrus, who's a very charismatic gang member. He assembles all the street gangs in New York City, and there used to be more street gang members than cops way back in the 70s. And he assembles them up in Van Cortlandt Park, which is the northernmost venture in the Bronx. And they're all meeting, and Cyrus is on this bluff overlooking all the gangbangers and all the gangs from all the other boroughs of the city and saying, you know, there's 400,000 of us and only 20,000 of them. We rule the streets. And at that moment, he got shot, and they blamed the Warriors, and you know the rest of that story. Warriors come out and play. But the point was, he was correct. Had they organized, had they been in solidarity with one another like tribes, you know, who respected different boundaries, there's 400,000 gangbangers at one point. Only at that time, about 22,000 cops. We're starting to get to that point. There's no police academy. So there's no recruitment going on. Record retirements, because in New York City, cops can retire 20 years, half pay, a full boat of benefits for them and their family until the day they die. So they go down to Port St. Lucie in East Coast of Florida. They get an ice cream stand. They got two incomes, and they're covered. So they're bailing out. In fact, they have so many requests for retirement that they can't even process it fast enough. So we'll probably go from 36,000 cops down to 30,000 cops within a year. And that is too low a number of cops to have. And then remember, we're target number one for the terrorists out there, the remnants of Al-Qaeda, ISIS, and the rest of those crazies who know that New York City is the capital of all Jews. So hit them here in New York City. It's the financial capital. Hit them twice. And revenge for America's role in the Middle East. So they got a reason to be happy out there knowing that the cops are going to be crippled. And I must tell you, Gary, the intel that the cops have not had for the Black Lives Matter and Antifa protests is appalling because they have state-of-the-art technology. They're able to pinpoint a pimple on an ISIS terrorist in a desert in Yemen. And yet, they haven't been able to track any of these domestic terrorists. They haven't been able to infiltrate. They haven't been able to get young police officers, white, black, Hispanic, or Asian, to go within the ranks to be able to get intel. That's the number one complaint I get from deputy inspectors who run the precincts is that One Police Plaza is not giving them any intel about these street demonstrations and these marauders.
So it's almost as if you anticipated my next question, and it's the second from the last question. And that has to do with what happened this weekend. We know that initially the protests on the street were a reaction to what happened in Minneapolis. And some of the people out there, probably the majority of the people out there, were peacefully protesting, but then they got infiltrated by people who were just intent on trying to bring things down, or maybe they were just looking for an excuse to break windows. I don't know. But this weekend, and I think it's fair to say this is not a reaction to what, equal and opposite reaction to what happened in Minneapolis. They marched across the Brooklyn Bridge from Brooklyn to Lower Manhattan. They set fires. People are sitting in outside cafes because you're not allowed to eat inside because of the COVID. They're knocking the tables over while the people are sitting there and eating in Little Italy. Little Italy, back in the bad old days, that wouldn't have happened in Little Italy because some Goomba would have stood up and said, no, not on our block.
Well, in fact, that's why they paid protection to the mobsters joking on their lobsters, was to make sure that would never happen. And as much as I hate the mob, and I hate them, loathe them, despise them, it's clear that if organized crime were running the show in Little Italy today, you wouldn't have had the flash mob that came through there on Saturday night at about 9 o'clock, like locusts through the cornfield. And all they did was start pushing over tables, disrupting patrons, threatening owners and operators, setting fires in the street in an area that is just slowly returning, ever so slowly now. Our Governor Cuomo, Andrew Evil Eyes Cuomo, King Cuomo II, the son of Mario Faccia Bruta Cuomo, King Cuomo I, is really a sadist. He's torturing these bar owners and restaurant owners by not allowing indoor dining, even though he said if you follow all the rules and we break the curve and there aren't any more deaths, which they're not, and there are very few positive coronavirus persons who emerge, then we're going to allow for indoor dining. And yet nearby in the suburbs, they have indoor dining. So you scratch your head and you say, you're just ratcheting it up. And then all of a sudden, this flash mob comes through, Antifa, total anarchists. They're coming with weapons of war. They have shields, just like in Portland. They're brothers in solidarity. They're the whitest city in America. I mean, they had Portland, and all of a sudden, it's for Black Lives Matter. It's anarchists. They want to destroy everything. They don't support Biden. They don't support Trump. They don't support government. And here it is. Some of the patrons at the restaurants who were sitting outdoors, they saw the demonstration coming in. Hey, Black Lives Matter. And they say, hey, you, big, get the hell out of here. And to start lighting fires and start cursing, and everybody's, oh, my God. So imagine all the hard work done to try to get these restaurants functioning again. Who the hell is going to go down to Little Italy? Who's going to go to Chinatown? Who's going to go into Lower Manhattan and deal with the few businesses that actually are open and ready to make some moolah, some scatterall? So the deed was done. And where did they all come from? Brooklyn. They came over the Brooklyn Bridge. They didn't do it in their neighborhood. They didn't do it in Park Slope, Prospect Heights. They didn't do it in the hipster millennial areas because most of them are white. They're millennials and they're hipsters. No, they didn't do it in their neighborhood. They came into Manhattan because they know that's the epicenter. That is the economic catalyst for not only the whole country, for the state of New York. And if Manhattan is on the skids, the city is on the skids, the state is on the skids, and the country is on the skids.
So if this city is on the skids, I have to say to you, you got to have your head examined since you want to be mayor of New York, because there is a whole litany of things that you're going to have to deal with if you are successful and are elected mayor, it's not just going to be the crime, because the economy of the city is in the pits, and we don't have time to get into all of that. We're talking about the crime right now. What's the first thing you're going to do with regard to crime if you become mayor of New York City?
First off, you have to convince the people you got to be a cheerleader, improve, don't move. That's what I see each and every day on moving trucks in a lot of neighborhoods. And these are people who normally would have stayed and would have fought for what they knew was right, but they're out of here. So that's number one. You got to convince them, hey, give me a little bit of chance. Number two, you got to get that street crime unit, that undercover unit out on the streets that is so proficient at stopping the gangs and getting the guns off the street. And you got to double their numbers, because now you're going to need it. And number three, you got to teach everybody we're going to have to do more with less. That's right. Politicians, they know how to roll strong when the money is coming in, but they don't know how to teach people to do more with less. That's what I've done with the Guardian Angels. We're in 13 countries, 130 cities, and we throw nickels around like manhole covers. So who do you want? Some politician who spends, and then when there's no money, doesn't know how to operate? Or do you want somebody on a shoestring budget who created a global organization and will be able to convince people that we got to start doing more for ourselves? We can't be so dependent on government. When you're so dependent on government and they're having a hard time, they leave you hanging out there. They basically say, hey, bupkis, tough noogies, you're on your own. So learn how to be more self-empowered.
And I imagine a new police commissioner would be on the top of your list.
Oh, new police commissioner. Obviously, a complete restructuring of the command structure, because these men and women are going to have no respect from the new men and women coming up through the ranks. And more importantly, no police security for any elected or appointed officials. No SUVs, no cars. If regular people got to go down into the armpit of the cesspool of crime, where crime is up 30% in the subways, and it's 1/5 the number of people riding the subway. Can you believe that? 30% increase in subway crime, and yet only 1/5 the number of people are riding the subways. And the same is true of the buses. So guess what? You want to get around? You take a city bus, you take a city train, no SUVs, no cars, no security entourages, and everything has to be cut, so that it's pragmatic, it's common sense, and the taxpayers don't end up in the poorhouse subsidizing all the grandiose ideas of the elected officials who probably, outside of civil service, never worked a day in their life.
Including you, no cop protection.
Oh, what do I need police protection for? I'm probably the guy who's had more problems than all of them combined. At least you can pick me out of a lineup, a police lineup. A lot of people with police protection, you would say, who the hell are they? Oh, that's your city controller, the Mama Luke, the Mashad Scott Stringer. Who the hell is he? Oh, there's Corey Johnson, right? The speaker, the carpetbagger from Massachusetts, just like the rest of them. First Bloomberg, then all of a sudden de Blasio. Fool me once, fool me twice. You're going to fool me a third time, Corey Johnson. Who the hell is he? Most people couldn't identify him in a police lineup. And yet, he rolls strong with 4 police officers armed every 8 hours. So that means they have 12 security officers from the NYPD every day, 7 days a week. For what? To take them on shopping soirees? To take them to and from the fundraisers where they get wine-dined and pocket-lined? No. Like everyone else, walk, take a bicycle, maybe get on a Rebel scooter if you're really adventurous, or take the subway. Go down in the slime and grime of the subway, or take a city bus. No Ubers, no Lyfts. Live like real people.
Curtis Sliwa, who's been for decades fighting crime firsthand. We saw video of you battling people. Your jaw was broken a couple months ago, battling people who were looting stores. I thank you again for what you do for New York. I thank what you did for Detroit when I was there and you came in, rode to the rescue, and good luck in your campaign. It's not going to be easy. You're not running as a Democrat, and some people, they just vote D in New York City because they're not independently thinking, and that's going to be a tough road for you to hold.
Oh, yeah, and it's going to be blood in the streets, this campaign. I mean, if you're going to fight your campaign from up in the suites, you will lose. You got to get down there with AOC, all out crazy, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, the Democrats, social liberals out there. You got to battle them every inch of the way for every vote. You got to be in the projects. You got to be in the tenements. You got to go after the hipsters, the millennials. You got to go after the gays, the lesbians, the transgenders. You have to go after blacks and Hispanics. These are all the people that Republicans, you can't win. You get 25% of the vote. You might as well pack your bags and go on a vacation unless you go out there and fight for every vote. Now, all of these places I've been to many, many times. It's not like all of a sudden I went there one time for a photo op. So I'm just going to have to return. And let me tell you, a lot of them, they're going to try to physically reject me and tell me to get the hell out of there. Well, they're going to have to pick me up and throw me out. Either that or take me out in a cardboard box and bury me 6 feet under in the dirt outside.
Well, you mentioned AOC, and
I ain't retreating.
Yeah, I know you mentioned AOC, and I know you don't agree with her politics, but you have to give her credit. Joe Crowley took his district for granted. She was out there working the streets. The people in her neighborhoods in Queens knew she was going to get reelected. The Democratic Party didn't. So that speaks to what you just said. You have to be out on the streets, mingling with the real people, listening to them, showing that you understand their problems and dealing with their problems firsthand. Curtis Sliwa, founder of the Guardian Angels, thanks for joining us today. And as I like to say at the end of all of these discussions, stay safe and peace out.
I'll keep doing it. Thanks for the time, GB.